The sun dipped below the horizon, casting streaks of amber and gold across the Sacramento skyline as Daniel Carter drove home after a long day at the office. His sedan hummed softly, the quiet purr of the engine blending with the low murmur of the radio. It was his routine. Leave work, unwind during the drive, and enjoy a peaceful evening. But tonight would be different. As he approached an intersection, the traffic light flickered from yellow to red, and Daniel instinctively slowed his vehicle to a stop. Before he could exhale, the sharp wail of a siren pierced the air, and the unmistakable red and blue glow of police lights illuminated his rear view. Daniel sighed, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. He wasn't speeding, he hadn't run a red light. Still, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down his window in preparation for what was to come. He had dealt with situations like this before, though never from this particular angle. He watched in his mirror as the officer approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stiff posture that exuded authority. "License and registration," the officer barked, his tone clipped and impersonal. Daniel nodded, his movements calm and deliberate as he reached into the glove compartment, retrieving the requested documents. He handed them over, maintaining eye contact with the officer, who took them with an air of scrutiny, flipping them over as if he expected to find something incriminating hidden. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer, his name tag reading Michael Reeves, asked. "I'm not entirely sure, officer," Daniel replied, his tone polite yet firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Reeves stated, though there was hesitation in his voice, as if he wasn't entirely convinced of his own accusation. Daniel frowned slightly. He was certain he had slowed down in time, but he didn't argue. "I see," he said, instead nodding slightly. "I thought I had, but I understand." Reeves didn't immediately hand the documents back. Instead, his eyes narrowed as he took in Daniel's appearance, his suit, his polished shoes, the air of composure he carried. Something about him seemed to shift Reeves' demeanor. "You're not from around here, are you?" Reeves asked. Daniel hesitated for the briefest moment. It was an unusual question for a routine traffic stop. "I moved here a few months ago," he answered. "My address is on the license." But Reeves wasn't really listening. His posture stiffened, his authority morphing into something more assertive, something more intrusive. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" Daniel exhaled slowly. The conversation had taken a turn, one he had encountered before but never quite gotten used to. "Just going home," he replied. His voice remained steady, but the shift in the air was undeniable. It was no longer just a traffic stop, it was something more. The golden hues of the Sacramento sunset stretched across the sky as Daniel Carter navigated the quiet city streets. It had been a long day, and he was eager to unwind, his thoughts drifting to the comfort of home. The hum of his sedan was steady, a soft background noise to the faint melody playing on the radio. As he approached an intersection, the light turned yellow, and he instinctively slowed to a stop. Then, without warning, flashing red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror. The sharp blare of a police siren cut through the evening calm. Daniel exhaled, already sensing that this stop would be different. He carefully pulled to the side of the road, rolling down his window as the police cruiser came to a halt behind him. He watched in his mirror as the officer emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp and his movements deliberate. The badge on his chest gleamed under the streetlights. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice clipped and authoritative. Daniel moved slowly, retrieving the documents from his glove compartment before handing them over. His composure was calm, unwavering, but he could feel the weight of the officer's gaze. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Daniel met the officer's stare. "I'm not entirely sure, officer." He didn't come to a full stop at the light. The response was quick, but there was something hesitant about it, as if the officer wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. Daniel frowned slightly but nodded. "I see. I believed I had slowed down in time, but I understand." Still, the officer, his name tag read Reeves, didn't move to return his documents. Instead, he studied Daniel closely, his expression unreadable. "You're not from around here, are you?" Daniel hesitated just for a moment. It was an odd question for a traffic stop. "I moved here a few months ago," he replied. "My address is on my license." But Reeves wasn't looking at the license anymore. His posture changed subtly, shifting from routine protocol to something else entirely. His eyes scanned Daniel's face, his suit, the way he carried himself. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" Daniel exhaled slowly. The air had changed. He recognized this moment, the silent shift when a standard encounter became something more. "Just going home," he answered evenly. Reeves smirked faintly, stepping back but only slightly. He folded Daniel's documents slowly, tucking them into his chest pocket with exaggerated slowness. "Step out of the car for me." Daniel's fingers tensed around the steering wheel, but his face remained neutral. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" Reeves' lips twitched, a poor attempt at masking irritation. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel knew the game being played, but he also knew that control was his greatest advantage. He nodded once, carefully unbuckling his seatbelt and opening the car door. As he stepped out, he noticed how Reeves' eyes flicked over him, sizing him up. Daniel stood taller than the officer, his presence measured and poised, though never threatening. "Hands where I can see them," Reeves ordered. Daniel complied, his movements smooth, calm. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Reeves' smirk deepened. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch. Reeves' composure faltered, just for a second. His hand twitched near his belt, a reflex more than necessity. "Watch your tone," Reeves warned. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "I'm simply asking a question." Reeves scoffed, pacing in a slow circle around the car. His frustration was tangible. He wasn't used to this, a man who wasn't afraid, who wasn't fidgeting, who wasn't easily intimidated. "You seem pretty confident," Reeves muttered, more to himself than to Daniel, "like you think you know what's going to happen next." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Confidence isn't the issue, officer. Respect is." For the first time, Reeves hesitated. The words hit deeper than expected, shaking his certainty just enough to make him second-guess his approach. But instead of stepping back, he doubled down. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For what reason?" Reeves' expression hardened. "I need to check for weapons." Daniel let out a quiet breath. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" Reeves' jaw tightened. "I'm not going to ask you again." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Daniel's eyes, but he didn't argue. He turned and placed his palms flat against the hood, his movements deliberate. Reeves approached, the crunch of his boots on the pavement breaking the silence. His hands moved over Daniel's pockets, his search unnecessarily rough. It wasn't about safety, it was about control, about asserting dominance. But Daniel didn't flinch, he didn't stiffen, he gave Reeves nothing. "You're clean," Reeves muttered, sounding almost irritated. Daniel turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Of course I am." Reeves bristled. His grip on the situation was slipping and he knew it. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said, his tone calm but firm. "No need for theatrics." Reeves' hand twitched near his holster, but he let Daniel move. Slowly, Daniel pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. "Daniel Carter, Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Reeves' breath caught in his throat. For the first time all night, it was his future on the line. The weight of the moment pressed against Officer Michael Reeves like an invisible force. The flashing red and blue lights of his cruiser cast streaks of color across the darkening pavement, but all he could focus on was the badge in Daniel Carter's hand. The words etched onto it, "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division," seemed to burn into his vision. For the past 10 minutes, Reeves had believed he was in control. He had believed he was dealing with just another driver, someone he could lecture, intimidate, and dismiss. But now, standing in the dim light of the evening, his heart pounded as the realization settled. He had been wrong. Daniel Carter stood calm, composed, unreadable. He hadn't needed to raise his voice or show aggression. He had let Reeves' own assumptions lead him into a corner he couldn't escape. Reeves swallowed hard. He had spent years patrolling the streets, believing he had a firm grasp on how to handle situations. He had stopped hundreds of drivers, made countless arrests. But now, the ground beneath him felt unsteady. Daniel studied him for a long moment before speaking, his voice steady but pointed. "Tell me, Officer Reeves," he said, closing his badge wallet with a soft snap. "What exactly were you expecting to find?" Reeves opened his mouth but no words came. He had accused Daniel of carrying a weapon. He had escalated a simple traffic stop into something it was never meant to be. And for what? Because Daniel had been calm? Because he had been confident? Because he had looked like someone Reeves wasn't used to respecting? Daniel didn't wait for an answer. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued, his tone professional but unwavering. "You're going to return my documents. Then you're going to take a very long look at the choices you made tonight." Reeves exhaled, the heat of humiliation creeping up his neck. His fingers fumbled slightly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out Daniel's license and registration. He handed them over, his hands not quite as steady as before. Daniel took them without a word, sliding them back into his wallet. He moved toward the driver's side door, but before getting in, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "You think this ends here?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but firm. Reeves' stomach twisted. "You'll be hearing from me again," Daniel said, "not as a driver you pulled over, but as the person responsible for determining whether you still deserve that badge you're wearing." Reeves' throat tightened. He had been in countless tense encounters before, but never one like this. Never one where the balance of power had shifted so suddenly, so completely. Daniel stepped into his car, started the engine and pulled onto the road without another glance. Reeves stood frozen, watching the taillights disappear into the night, knowing that his career, and everything he had believed about himself, had just changed forever. Underscore 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 underscore. Daniel Carter sat in the dimly lit office of Sacramento Police Chief Daniels, his hands clasped in front of him as he laid out the details of the traffic stop that had taken place just days before. Across the desk, Daniels listened in silence, his face unreadable, though the furrow in his brow deepened as Daniel recounted the escalation, the baseless suspicion, and Officer Michael Reeves' inability to justify his actions. When Daniel finished speaking, the room fell into a tense quiet. The air conditioning hummed faintly, the only sound filling the space. Daniels leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about Reeves," he admitted, "but it's never been anything substantial enough to take disciplinary action." Daniel nodded. He had anticipated this response. "That's the problem, Chief. It's never substantial until it is, until it escalates beyond repair. I've spent the last few days looking into his record, minor complaints, excessive stops, a pattern that's easy to dismiss in isolation, but together, it tells a much larger story." Daniels rubbed his temple. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" "A full review," Daniel said without hesitation. "Not just of Reeves, but of the department's approach to officer conduct, how complaints are handled, how accountability is enforced." Daniels shook his head slightly. "You know that's going to ruffle feathers." "Good," Daniel said. "It should." The chief sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "You're asking me to open a door that a lot of people want to keep shut." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "I'm asking you to do the right thing." Daniels was silent for a long moment, then with a resigned nod, he reached for his phone. "I'll authorize the review," he said, "but you'd better be ready for the fallout." Underscore 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 under. The following weeks were a whirlwind of internal audits, interviews, and community forums. Daniel made it clear that this wasn't just about Michael Reeves, it was about the culture that allowed officers like him to operate unchecked. At public hearings, local residents shared their experiences, some hesitant at first, but soon their stories poured out. Patterns emerged. Overwhelming stops in specific neighborhoods, officers who had long histories of aggressive behavior yet remained on the force with nothing more than written warnings. The picture was clear. Sacramento's police department had more than a few bad apples, it had a structural problem. And not everyone was happy about the investigation. Daniel received pushback from officers who believed he was making them look bad. Some viewed him as a traitor, others saw him as a necessary force for change. But Daniel didn't care about his reputation within the ranks. His concern was for the people who had been subjected to injustice under the very system meant to protect them. Reeves' internal hearing came sooner than expected. Daniel sat across from him, watching as the officer, once so full of bravado, struggled to defend himself. The traffic stop alone might not have been enough for dismissal, but combined with his history, it painted a damning picture. The ruling came swiftly: suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and a final warning. As Reeves walked out of the room, he shot Daniel a look. Not of anger, but something closer to reluctant understanding. Maybe even regret. Daniel didn't gloat, he simply watched him leave, knowing that this was only the beginning. Real change wasn't about punishing one man, it was about reshaping the system that had allowed him to thrive unchecked. And Daniel Carter was just getting started. The fallout from Daniel Carter's push for reform spread through the Sacramento Police Department like wildfire. Officers whispered in the hallways, wary of internal affairs suddenly taking such a strong stance on accountability. Some viewed it as necessary, a long overdue shift in the culture of law enforcement. Others, particularly those with something to hide, saw it as a threat. Daniel, however, remained undeterred. The review he had initiated was no longer just about Michael Reeves. It had evolved into a full-scale evaluation of the department's practices, policies, and systemic shortcomings. Complaints that had once been dismissed or buried were being re-examined. Officers with repeated violations were being scrutinized, and the community, long skeptical of the department's commitment to justice, was finally being heard. At a press conference held at City Hall, Chief Daniels stood before a crowd of journalists and concerned citizens. Cameras flashed as he cleared his throat, gripping the podium tightly. Effective immediately, he announced, the Sacramento Police Department will implement a series of reforms including increased oversight of officer conduct, mandatory de-escalation training, and the creation of an independent civilian review board. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, watching as the chief delivered the words that only weeks ago had seemed impossible. This wasn't just lip service, it was a genuine shift, one that would ripple through the department for years to come. But not everyone was happy. That evening, as Daniel locked up his office and headed toward his car, a figure stepped out of the shadows of the parking lot. It was Officer Reeves. For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension from their last encounter still lingered between them. Reeves, once brimming with arrogance, now looked worn down. "He really went all in on this, huh?" Reeves muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. Daniel met his gaze, unwavering. "It was never just about you, Reeves. It was about making sure this department operates the way it's supposed to." Reeves let out a bitter chuckle. "You know, a lot of guys think you just want to make us look bad." Daniel shook his head. "I want to make us better." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Reeves didn't have a retort. He simply nodded, turned, and walked away. Underscore 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 and at underscore 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 underscore. This also applies to resources regardless of where they are stored. The next morning, Daniel sat at his desk reviewing the next steps for the reform initiative. A framed quote on his wall caught his eye, one he had looked at countless times but now held even more meaning. "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are." Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. There would be more pushback, more resistance, but change had begun, and he would see it through to the end. The ripple effects of Daniel Carter's push for accountability had begun to reshape the Sacramento Police Department in ways no one could ignore. What had started as a single encounter during a routine traffic stop had turned into a full-scale reform initiative. Officers now underwent rigorous de-escalation training, civilian oversight committees were being established, and past complaints were being re-evaluated with fresh eyes. But the process of change was anything but smooth. Some officers were openly resistant, believing that the review process was an attack on law enforcement rather than an effort to restore community trust. Others, particularly those who had witnessed corruption but felt powerless to act, saw Daniel's efforts as a long overdue reckoning. The department was divided, with every officer forced to question not only their own conduct, but the culture they had participated in for years. One morning, as Daniel walked through department headquarters, he overheard a hushed conversation between two patrol officers. "This whole thing is a witch hunt," one of them muttered. "They're acting like we're all bad cops." His partner, a younger officer with just a few years on the force, sighed. "I don't know. Maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's about the guys who've been getting away with things they shouldn't." Daniel paused for a moment before continuing down the hall. That exchange encapsulated the battle he was fighting, the resistance to change from those who feared scrutiny and the quiet realization among others that reform was necessary. Underscore 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 itisa sa. Meanwhile, Officer Michael Reeves faced his internal review. The once confident officer who had reveled in authority now sat stiffly in front of a panel that included Daniel himself. His history of aggressive stops, racial profiling complaints, and excessive use of force had caught up with him. "The review board has examined multiple complaints against you," Daniel said, his tone steady but firm. "Your conduct has demonstrated a repeated disregard for proper protocol and fair treatment of civilians." Reeves clenched his jaw, but for once he didn't argue. Perhaps he finally understood that his actions had consequences. The board deliberated for hours, ultimately deciding on a 6-month suspension, mandatory training, and a final warning: one more violation and he would be stripped of his badge. As the verdict was read, Reeves let out a slow breath. He wasn't happy about it, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. He met Daniel's gaze for a brief moment before walking out of the room. Daniel knew it wasn't a perfect resolution. Reeves still had his job, but the system that had once shielded officers like him was finally holding them accountable. Underscore 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 under ss underscore 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 ss underscore 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 underscore. Beyond the department, the changes Daniel had helped implement were beginning to resonate with the public. Community meetings that had once been filled with anger and frustration now carried a different tone: cautious optimism. Citizens who had long distrusted the police started engaging in discussions about what law enforcement should look like. At one such meeting, an elderly black man raised his hand. "I've lived here for 50 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of officers come and go, some good, some bad, but this is the first time I've seen someone on the inside actually push for change." His words stayed with Daniel long after the meeting ended. The fight for justice was ongoing. There would always be resistance, setbacks, and those who preferred the status quo. But change was happening not just within the department but in the hearts and minds of the people it was meant to serve. And for Daniel, that was the real victory. Underscore 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 underscore. It's easy to understand why psychedelics are terrifying. In life, integrity and accountability are the pillars that uphold trust, whether in our personal relationships, our workplaces, or even our justice system. Daniel Carter's story reminds us that true leadership is not about authority, but about responsibility. Standing up for what is right, even in the face of resistance, is not always easy, but it is necessary for meaningful change. For older adults, this lesson resonates deeply. Many have witnessed history unfold, moments of progress, setbacks, and the tireless efforts of those who refused to accept injustice. It teaches us that no matter our age, we have a role to play in shaping a fairer society. Whether through mentoring younger generations, advocating for community improvements, or simply leading by example, our voices still matter. Respect, fairness, and dignity should not be privileges reserved for some, but rights upheld for all. Just as Daniel Carter used his position to demand change, we too can hold institutions accountable and encourage the kind of world we want to leave behind. Because at the end of the day, justice isn't just about laws, it's about the values we choose to live by.